So, guys, I want to talk about All Elite Wrestling, and this is actually kind of like going to be really helpful for them. But their biggest goal for 2026, their long term goal is to fill up Wembley Stadium. And no shit, Sherlock. One thing they want to mention is that with professional wrestling, it's always good to have long term goals. Like, for example, with WWE, they've always had the goal of going bigger and better. You kind of look at what happened in the 1980s, where, like, with WrestleMania 1, they made that big deal. WrestleMania 2, if I'm correct, they had that in multiple cities, and they realized that that wasn't good. And then WrestleMania 3, if I'm correct, was the one they did in Detroit, where they had, like, lots of people. And WWE kind of had that mentality early on of just, buying all the competition, becoming this big wrestling empire, and keep expanding and take advantage of the television market. And then you kind of saw how they became a conglomeration. And then also in the Attitude Era, you kind of looked at they struggled with WCW beating them, and they were kind of like saying, hey, like long term, we got to just, be really edgy. We got to push boundaries. We got to make this kind of like the show that's going to last really. So their long term goals, help them out really. When I look at companies like, like TNA Wrestling, or when like during the Dixie Carter era, they really did not have a long term goal outside of getting on Spike TV when that happened really. Like they didn't want to do weekly pay per views. They wanted to get on Spike TV, get those TV contracts, get more exposure really. And then after that, I didn't really feel they had that many long term goals. But when I look at AEW, I also kind of feel that I think for right now, I don't really see a lot of long term goals in their company. I think in the beginning, they really just cared about being like the best wrestling company that they could be. And I feel like, there's been some complacency. I feel like they've struggled a lot. And sometimes when people struggle, they can kind of give up on their goals, or they can be more focused on like drama and other things. Like how I think last year AEW struggled for a long time after CM Punk left the company with bad will. But you remember how like last year in April you had Will Ospreay versus Bryan Danielson, but what overshadowed that was a lot of bad shows and a lot of bad pay-per-views. Like they really cared about showing the CM Punk footage when they had, like I said, Super Card of Honor in WrestleMania territory. They drew like only 1,000 people. And then they also had a few Battle of the Belt show and TV specials really. So they bombed really because they were more concerned about embarrassing CM Punk instead of saying, hey, you know what, at the St. Louis show we have a dream match, once in a generation match really of Ospreay versus Bryan Danielson. Like imagine if the whole focus was on that really. And the whole focus of 2023 was turning Will Ospreay from a New Japan star and giving him more exposure to make him one of the big players of your company, really. Like, this is why having long-term goals are good. Every single year, you got to have goals. But the goal of AEW needs to be selling out Wembley Stadium in 2026. And there's a couple of reasons for this. That they are in a complacency mode right now. Like I've said, that one bad thing that happened recently is that they had like around 29,000 people at Texas Stadium. And what I would say is that the stadium sits like 42,000 people. So honestly, that's still not that good because that's almost like getting like a 59 on a test really, like it's almost like they're almost 59% full. If they kind of hit like, 35,000 all the way to 42,000, that would be acceptable. But it's still a good attendance, but they need to go bigger and better. And I don't want to be Simon Miller where I'm like, oh, well, you know what, that shouldn't matter to me. No, it is a failure. And then also the other failure about that is that you went from like 80,000, it went from like close to 80,000, either 70 to 80,000 at Wembley Stadium one year. The following year, I think they were around like 50,000. Now you went around 29,000. So it seems like every single year you do all in, you're losing like roughly 20,000 people. So that is not a good look, really. What's going to happen at Wembley Stadium? Are you going to have like 9,000 people in a stadium and not get 10% full? Is it going to be so low that when you go to the O2, that you're going to go to the O2 Center, or you're going to go to Scotland and be like, hey, we're still glitching where we're going to do All In just because of the bad ticket sales. So, um, so that's not good. So the other part of this, and I'll say this, is that that's why they have to focus on that, because they have to kind of be like, okay, we have to make sure we're doing a growth, not a diminishing return. The next part of this is that it's going to motivate them to have bigger and better shows. Like this week, they don't really have that good of a show really, because what a lot of people are saying, and I 100% agree, is that they're trying to do Blood and Guts in Chicago. So they're going to extend the Death Rider storyline and then say, hey, you know what, the end of this is going to be one of two things. It's either going to be in Blood and Guts in Chicago, or they're going to extend this all the way into All Out. And All Out is kind of one of their most violent pay-per-views because of what happened last year with multiple ultra-violent matches, really. So they may do something where you're going to have Jon Moxley versus Hangman Adam Page, the end of it, maybe in a steel cage, maybe a lights out match at All Out, really, because of all that, and because that's the show that's usually considered one of their most violent ones as well, really. So I just think that that's a bad move for them, because a lot of people don't like the Death Riders. And this feels like an epilogue. You gave Hangman the championship. Now this week it's Wheeler Useless versus Hangman Adam Page. And then also you don't know if this is going to be a squash match or this is going to be a 50-50 match where it goes a while to make Wheeler Yuta not like a jobber or anything like that, really. So when you have that goal at Wembley Stadium saying we got 80,000 people, you have to think of weekly television. You have to say, hey, last week was embarrassing. We went from 29,000 people to going to a 5,000 seat arena, drawing maybe around 1,000 or 1,100 people. Hey, in TNA Wrestling, their Slammiversary show, they drew 700%, 7 times that amount, at the UBS Arena. Another thing that I will say that I also feel is that it's going to motivate them to push new stars, because I've always said Anthony Bowens can be a big deal. You also have Kyle Fletcher on that list. You have Bandito. On the women's roster, you could always do a story where Billy Starks kind of is like the underdog wrestler. You've not really pushed Athena that much on AEW television. On ROH television, you've done that. You could bring back Eddie Kingston and have him feud with Jon Moxley. You can reestablish Darby Allin. You can use this time to say, hey, we're going to have the show of shows next year, but part of having the show of shows is that we're going to make everybody bigger and better. So why not develop your roster, develop your divisions, and develop your talent, really. So it motivates them to develop their talent. And then the next thing I would say is it motivates them to develop their divisions, because they have because all their divisions are a clusterfuck. Like, remember a few years ago when I was at one of the Boston shows, Boston Blood Guts, I was talking to somebody about Darby Allin, and I was saying it's kind of a little weird that he was wrestling for an opportunity at the heavyweight title, and then they went for him to be the TNT champion, and then a couple months after that, they went for him to be the tag team champion. So there's a lot of wrestlers that get shuffled around. And I also feel that another thing with AEW is that they don't have really clear divisions. Like Kyle Fletcher has been facing Will Ospreay, and he's been going after the heavyweight title, Will Ospreay, really. So when you think of Kyle Fletcher, you think of a heavyweight champion or something in the heavyweight division, but now he's after the TNT championship. So it's almost like, who's in that TNT championship group? Because that really has to be Scorpio Sky. That has to be Kyle Fletcher, AR Fox, Adam Cole, Dustin Rhodes, Sammy Guevara, Dalton Castle, Anthony Bowens, and a couple other people. You have Okada holding multiple championships, and including the Continental title. So who's in the Continental or international title division? Is it Kenny Omega, Konosuke Takashita, Swerve Strickland, and who else really? In the tag team division, that is a clusterfuck. Because you really only have the Hurt Syndicate, you have the Outrunners, Jet Speed, the Young Bucks, and a couple other ones. But when you look at the Hurt Syndicate, they don't have good baby faces to challenge them. You honestly have to take members of the Don Callis family who have some meat on their bones, really, and challenge them. And then also when you look at the trios division, you just have the Ops. You have Scorpio Sky, who's just getting started. You have Ricochet and Gates of Agony, that's just getting started, really. So you don't have a lot of trios teams. And when you look at the heavyweight championship picture, it's interchangeable. Like, really, the heavyweight championship picture right now is Will Ospreay, who's out on injury. It's Swerve Strickland, but he's feuding with Okada for one of the secondary titles. It's Hangman and John Moxley, and now you have him having a match with Wheeler Yuta, and then it's MJF, really. So right now it's really Hangman, MJF, and Will Ospreay and John Moxley, when that should be way more people, really. So when you look at Wembley Stadium next year, you have to really say, hey, heroes are champions. Everybody that you saw in the Casino Battle Royale match, who were facing for an opportunity at the Anytime, Anywhere contract, you really, really have to say all those people are going to be considered for a heavyweight championship, except for Max Caster, because they decided to be, 48-hour film project and put his goofy ass in there. So part of the Wembley Stadium show is to say, hey, we need to make clear divisions. And I think the last thing that I'll say, in addition to storytelling, is that they need to find the next top villain, and the right villain is MJF and the Hurt Syndicate, because people are sick of the Young Bucks. You tried that in 2023, and that was criticized. You follow that up with Moxley, that was criticized. You had MJF do a good job after CM Punk fucked everything up in 2023 with the All Out incident. And MJF was a good champion until he got to a point of doing stupid ass comedy with Adam Cole, really. So right now, a serious MJF could do a lot to be the top villain, really. A serious MJF can do a lot to be the top villain if he was given the right writers, or if they used ChatGPT, or they had other people come in and they're like, hey, you know what, MJF versus Hangman, that could be something. Or there can be a day where it's like maybe Ospreay joins MJF and is like, hey, you know what, Ospreay realizes he's too much of a nice guy. He goes down a path of darkness before going back on the path of righteousness. So all that stuff is really, really important. And I think the last thing that I would say, two more things that I gotta say. You think about ROH, and the problem with ROH is that it's just a show to have a show, really. That needs to be developmental, and you need to kind of do something like say, hey, we have to take our ROH people and we have to push them in AEW. We have to treat that like a developmental. Like Athena needs to beat Toni Storm eventually. Eventually you need to have Athena, Toni Storm, Mercedes Moné in a triple threat match, like winner takes all. You need to do something like say, okay, you know what, who should be the next woman up there? Should it be Thunder Rosa, who's a little bit lost on the AEW roster? Should it be Nyla Rose? Should it be, Tekla, Queen Aminata, Red Velvet, or a couple other people? Who's going to be your next in line, really? Because you can't just put a title on Athena and have her be champion for hundreds of days and other things like that. You have to get to a point where you're like, hey, there's things need to change with this. The next thing that I would have to say, in my opinion, is that you really have to work on storytelling, because storytelling is not that hard to do, and this is where AEW struggles with. And like I said, there are many people like me who should be hired to AEW and do storylines. Like one of the storylines that I have, and one of the storylines that they got right now that they're not developing, is Dustin Rhodes versus Kyle Fletcher. Generation versus generation. This match should happen at Forbidden Door 100%, really. You could do something where Sammy gets jealous and screws over Dustin, or you have Dustin get badly beaten by Kyle Fletcher, and then Sammy Guevara could become like a top babyface. Or you do something like, Max Caster and Anthony Bowens have been struggling as single stars. They eventually say, you know what, we need to become a tag team division. We need to become a babyface and eventually get the titles off the Hurt Syndicate, because that would work for them, really. Or you have Max Caster and Anthony Bowens, they do the New Day type of thing, where they become a team again, but then also they do stuff where they go after singles titles at the same time. That's another story. Another story is that Tekla and Queen Aminata have been having a bunch of issues. So, why don't we do something like we have, like Queen Aminata and Tekla have a feud and talk about why they're fighting? Or you can do something like maybe like Tekla is like, is trying to always pick fights with people, and you're like, hey, this is not going to happen. Or Queen Aminata is like, you know what, you've been getting all these chances. Maybe there's some white privilege because like Tekla was fired from a company storyline wise. So why don't you have Queen Aminata maybe talk about that, or pride versus privilege, or why don't you do something like Jon Moxley saying, you know what, I get a rematch that's in my contract, that's going to happen, and you know what, I'm not going to move on until you beat me in a rematch, and then you do that eventually, and then you get past that. Or why are we not talking about Hiroshi Tanahashi, who is retiring? So the honor of facing Hiroshi Tanahashi at Forbidden Door. Like, this is the issue with AEW, is that they don't have storylines throughout their show, like compelling, entertaining storylines. They have to really do that, and that's not that hard to do, really. That is so not that hard, really. It's just they have to care and they have to experiment with this. So if you want to sell out Wembley Stadium, imagine if you had 10 or 12 storylines, go throughout a period of a year, really, and you cared about all these storylines and they're a little different somehow. Or or you can stick where you're at, really, where you're spinning your wheels with Tony Storm, you're spinning your wheels with the Death Riders, and you have repetitive characters like Tony Storm doing her licentious lyrics, or MJF being a sociopath, or other things. Like, I think a good storyline is Will Ospreay. Like, I would do Will Ospreay versus Hangman at Forbidden Door, and you could do something where maybe Moxley interferes, or maybe Moxley beats down Will Ospreay and he says, no, I still want to do the match, and then he loses for being too nice, really. Or you have something where Ospreay takes on too much. He comes back, he's saying that he's a little battered, he should be taking off more time, but he faces Hangman, they have a great match, but Ospreay can't get the job done because he didn't give himself that much time to wrestle, and he kind of blames, being too nice. Like, he wanted to kind of do a lot for the audience, and he goes down a path of, you know what, I got to think about myself, I got to embrace that darkness, really. And then next year, you do a storyline where he goes from the darkness to the light, and Hangman's like saying, I went down this path, don't do it, and then Ospreay learns that he should be listening to Hangman, other things like that. So ultimately, that's a storyline. So, like I've said, that there's so many things that AEW can do to eventually, really, really improve and get a lot of shit done the right way. But unfortunately, they don't do that. So I really just hope that as a company that they really get their shit together. If you really say we need to sell out Wembley Stadium, I think it's like 80,000 or 100,000 people, if I'm correct, start with everything I'm saying. Start with improving AEW and saying that when we go from a show, like I think they said they drew like 6,000 or more people at Collision like 2 years ago today at the Prudential Center, and now Collision can't get 1,000 people at their show at Chicago, really, so yeah, they really have to be like, okay, we're going to Wembley Stadium, we got to do everything to improve AEW, make this another year of consistent improvements, and then they'll be fine, really, So I just think that it's very unfortunate that they may not see this as a long-term goal over a period of year to fix a lot of their problems that they need to be working on right now.